you're starting off here, Chris. Huh? How's your year starting off here?
Oh, great, man.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm not
a little pretty chill. I'm having I guess haven't gone too crazy yet. Yeah.
And I had a good one myself. I just stayed home with the family, just hung out, but it was a great time.
Nice.
I had a wonderful time. I know you were working.
Yeah.
But it's sweet. Got to make money on the new year. It's the best way to bring it in.
It was actually a pretty fun wedding, if I'll say so myself.
Sweet.
We hung out until just a little bit after midnight.
Sweet.
And, yeah.
Hey, Rick, are you there? Can you hear us?
I can certainly hear you.
Sweet, man. Well, I introduced you just a little bit before, but we have the great Rick Thompson on the phone here. He's, of course, normally in studio with us, giving us insight, so we're happy to have you.
Well, I'm glad to be here. It's always fun, even when you're on radio, even when you're on the phone instead of in person.
Hey, man, right? I still have you a donut here.
You said that last time.
Hey, they're here, man. You're not here to get them. I don't know. It's all right. It'll be next time, too. Every time I'll have them for you. Well, I got Chris here to bounce some words off of back and forth, so, yeah, that'll be nice.
Right. Absolutely.
So, a couple big things have been happening recently. I know that there's some news going on. I didn't know what exactly you wanted to speak on here, or how far you wanted to go into those topics this week. So, what do you think is most worth bringing up first in the show? We got a long show coming up, and of course, we're gonna celebrate 420, do the news at 5, and everything is normal. But I know that there's a few abnormal things in terms of news this week. So what do you think?
Well, there's a couple of different statements made by Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, one that came out just before the new year and another one that came out today, offering clarification on how they're going to be structuring the MMFLA program, the licensing gigs for all of the businesses handling cannabis in the state. One's a very technical clarification for testing laboratories about the amount of heavy metals that will be tested for and tolerated for an approval in testing labs. And then the other offers a brand new set of applications and a couple of new fees, too. So maybe we'll get into that a little bit later, talk about the fees and the structure and why it is and what it is.
Sweet. Well, that's good. You thinking we're going to have you for the entire show here?
Yeah, it seems that way. I'm planning on it. So.
Well, there you go, people. Keep listening because we're going to have Rick here the whole time. And this show might be a little bit different in terms of, if it's me and Chris here running it, so you might have a little bit more music, a little bit more bullshit talk about better ways to get stoned, things like that. That's okay, right?
Always good.
I think so.
Yeah, I wanted to just, I guess, bring up this first topic that I just had in my head about the importance of having the importance of having a caregiver. Now, this might not be something official that I'm talking about, like an official caregiver that you've signed on the rights to your plants to, but just more along the lines of somebody that is looking out for your cannabis needs on their own, somebody that's reaching out to take care of you. In my history with purchasing cannabis, there's been oftentimes, and especially before everything became medically legal, that it was terrifying to do that. And the other day, me and Chris encountered a caregiver that was super duper amazing. It felt like you were going to your aunt's house or something like that.
Absolutely.
You just feel welcome,
yeah.
And it feels like that's the way it should have been forever.
Yes.
And if everybody had, somebody like that was caring for them and representing their needs is if they were as important as any other patient, you know what I mean? We can't, put importance on one patient over another. So it's just nice having people out there like that. And I think that everybody should strive to try to find somebody, even if you grow your own, a nice caregiver, somebody that is like this person, right?
Yeah.
That was amazing. And I guess one of my fears, like Rick, you were talking about it the other day, what's going to happen with the caregiver process if recreational legalization takes place?
Well, remember that legalization is separate from the medical program. So medical marijuana will still remain viable in Michigan. However, our legalization program is so much more favorable for people to utilize. We don't put a lot of restrictions on it. You don't have to have certain diseases to qualify. You don't have to pay the state for a license to do it. So there'll still be an opportunity for people to caregive under the medical marijuana program. But whether or not they still choose to do that once they have the freedoms available from the CRMLA MI legalized proposal, probably not very likely.
Is that
The
for
important thing,
financial
though,
reasons?
is to remember that the same people that are caregiving now will be providing cannabis then, I'm sure. So,
So would you say that they would jump out of the being official registered caregiver for financial purposes? Like there'd be maybe more gain not filing with the state?
Well, if you're a caregiver, you're currently allowed to grow up to 72 plants in your home or in your place. Under the MI legalized proposal, you'll just be allowed to go 12. So if you're one of the people that utilize your caregiver license in order to be able to provide an additional income for yourself or to, for whatever purpose other than just satisfying those patient needs, then you won't be able to have the same size of garden under the MI legalized program as you would under the medical marijuana program. However, with the MI legalized program, you can casually transfer without compensation a certain amount of up to 1 ounce between peoples. So you could participate without getting paid. I think a lot of caregivers realize that the cost of cultivating cannabis is so great that without some kind of remuneration system, they just really can't do a larger garden. So I expect garden size to come down. I expect caregiver numbers to fall. And of course, I think that's probably a fair, accurate thing to say for 2018, considering what Lara's doing and also the fact that we're moving away from caregivers interacting with dispensaries in a way that allows them to make money. So,
well, that is interesting. So I guess, I mean, that's very interesting because I could see what would maybe happen and could be beneficial to people just like doing their own 12 plants is the whole trade game, right? If you're like cultivating your own product, you could like benefit massively by just trading strains amongst other people that are doing the same thing. But I'm just wondering, are more people going to grow when it becomes recreationalized than card holders do now that it's medical?
I definitely think so, and I'll tell you why. First of all, the medical program only has about 270,000 patients in it who are allowed to grow, and about 47,000 actually, caregivers licensed to cultivate also. Under the MI legalized proposal, that number becomes 7 million. That's the number of adults in Michigan, 6 point something, rounded up to 7 million. So you've got a huge number of people that are now allowed to, under law, cultivate without having to register, without having to go to a doctor first, without having to pay some kind of special fee. So what we'll see is, I think, threefold. First, you'll see some people that were always growing but was always doing it on the down low. They'll become more upfront with what they're doing because it'll be legal. You'll see that 270,000 patient population, embrace the new legalization program, and you'll see all of those patients that are currently growing for themselves continue to grow, even if they're not registered. But you'll also see a ton of people who've always been interested in it, but never wanted to because it was illegal, or were afraid to, or they lived in a situation where it wasn't possible previously because of the legal status of cannabis. You'll see those people try to experiment. And we saw the same thing in the medical marijuana population, too. During the first few years of the MMMA program, tons of people tried to start their own individual home cultivation systems. And it was great. Everybody learned a whole lot. They also learned how you can kill plants really fast. So, not everybody's cut out to be a gardener, but everybody wants to try. And in 2018, and especially 2019 and 2020, we'll see a lot more people making effort to do that. And you know who really wins in those situations is the people who own the hydro stores, because everybody needs material, they need growing medium, they need nutrients, they need lights, they need all of the things that make a garden successful. And when more people try to get into this as a hobby or in order to satisfy their medical need, you know, money has changed hands. And industry is stimulated. And that's what we need in Michigan, is more economic opportunity.
Huh. Well, I'm with you there. I mean, more economic opportunity is probably, you know, the main reason that this has been pushed so far. I mean, like, you're seeing what's happening in all these other states that have, you know, become recreationally legal. And I know that we're basing some of our law basis, and we're trying to take some notes from places like Colorado and stuff. Do you think it's going to be similar to Colorado?
I think that we will see it becoming similar to Colorado. Now, I know that in the early days when we were still forming the law and we were working with legislators, saying things like, just like Colorado was a bad language, because people didn't want to duplicate Colorado. However, now in 2017, 2018 America, Colorado's model seems like a pretty good one to follow. The reason people didn't think it was good to begin with was because law enforcement and the anti-cannabis forces spread an awful lot of misinformation from Colorado in the first few years. We had not a lot of statistical data to back up things that we were saying, like safer driving, fewer children using cannabis, things of that nature, all of the money. So there was a lot of negatives being thrown out there. You know, kids are going to die. We're going to see all these car accidents, piles and piles of dead cars on the expressway from stone drivers crashing into each other. And that ruled the airwaves. But now that we've got evidence and information that shows a contradictory scenario, being like Colorado is not so bad. And I've been to Colorado, and I'll tell you, they have dispensaries that are interspersed along with regular businesses, just like they were 7-Elevens, or just like they were dog food places or Supercuts, because it's not that big a deal in Colorado anymore. And in Michigan, that's how it'll be too.
Huh. Well, there you go. Well, that's something to look forward to, definitely. So I don't want to get into any next topic too much, as we got our 420 break coming up. But I will say after the break, we got a lot to talk about. So if all the listeners can just stay there, Rick, if you don't mind hanging on, we're going to get into our music break now. And make a couple adjustments on our end and be back around 4:25. All right?
That's the plan. I'll talk to you then.
All right. So everybody have a wonderful 420. We'll see you when we come back. All right. Still with us, everybody? I'm glad to hear it. Rick, you still with us?
You know it.
Oh, sweet. That's what I like to hear. So, yeah, we're still here. I'm in the studio here with Chris. We got Rick on the phone. So what's going on? What's popping? So Rick, we had that little technical malfunction in the beginning of the show. Are you aware of this?
You had a technical malfunction in the beginning of the show?
Yeah, I'm not even sure if they heard us for the first few minutes there.
They're lost. We were awesome.
We can only hope.
It's called an encoder error, and I simply shut down things and restarted them, and we seem to be going. So to explain our long delay, and also why Rick may be reiterating some of the wonderful details he just shared with us. I mean, we just had such an amazing conversation. I can't fathom anybody missing out on that, right?
Right. Well, now that we are after the 420 break, we have a little bit more of a solid segment. We can talk more in depth on some of the things we teased on earlier. How's that?
I think that's great.
Sounds good to me.
So have you actually met Chris before?
You know, I'm not sure if I've met Chris or not. Chris, you're like African-American and 4 foot tall, right?
Yes, nailed it.
Wow, man.
Probably not. That's probably not.
No, but no, I don't think we've actually met. Only through the show here. Talked back and forth, but
you know, one of the beautiful things about doing radio for so long is that you get a chance to talk to a variety of people, both legislators and laymen. And you know what I like? I like laymen better than I like legislators, frankly. I'm from Flint. I like real people. I don't like folks that use their wardrobe in order to, substitute for intelligence or claim some kind of a family pedigree instead of, real world experience. So,
well, that's not what I'm here to do.
There you go.
Yeah, no, I love folks. I love real people.
Thank you.
So, Chris, maybe for the listeners that don't know exactly who you are, you can explain why I brought you in originally. I think you could do that better than I can.
Yeah, I think just to be, kind of to represent some of the general public and to be informative about things that I like, and hopefully can share with you guys out there if you're interested. I think my expertise is, trying to be humble, somewhat limited, but if I can share anything with you that sticks, then that's my goal here.
Well, there you go. Thank you for that. He knows quite a bit as well about some extracts, some buds, some flowers. We're all connoisseurs here. Rick as well. Rick, are you willing to say on air one of the jobs or obligations that you had out there in Clio for the last cup? Because I'm willing to say I was a judge.
Oh yeah, I've talked about being a judge a bunch of times. Yep.
Well, good.
So and it's pronounced, it's Clio, not Cleo, but that's cool.
Clio.
Oh man, come on! Now you gonna call me out like that? But that's good. That's good. We got to get it right on here. So I could say just little opinion of my own that I like to switch between flower and schwacks. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes mixing the two is the way for me to get the best effect. What extracts have you been messing with this week, Chris?
This week, kind of same. I've still been on my same kick with the sauce and the live resins. Nice and real terpy stuff. I'm all about the flavor, man.
Man.
It's my favorite, yeah.
So, Rick, I'm trying this little segment out here where we could talk about, the smoking it for like 2 minutes, right after 420. Why not? So what about yourself this week? Anything, that popped out to you and you're like, everybody should try this?
Well, I am right now working on some purple chem that is so purple it is black. I mean, it's so dark perps that it's really deep. And I always appreciate the purples, not just from a visual standpoint, but also from a terpene standpoint too. That the smell of perps is a little bit different than it is from other things. I appreciate a little bit of a kick from the perps that I can appreciate too. When it comes to concentrates, I am a big fan of live resin because, with live resin, you have an opportunity to put terps back in. Sometimes during processes, terpenes, terpenoids are removed. And if they're not returned back into the final end product, you still have usable cannabis. It still has good medicinal properties, but it's just not as well-rounded and full-bodied. Chris, will you back me up on this? I mean, when you pop those terps back in there, doesn't it really blossom the product?
I think so. I think it helps. I think it is more of a vessel to get the medication to, not just providing like that extra flavor and even nice smell and aromas. But like you said, the medicine is still there even without all that stuff. But it makes it that much more enjoyable, I guess, too. So,
I tell you one thing I tried. Oh, go ahead, man. I want to hear it.
Go ahead, Derek.
So one of these things I tried last week, an individual flavor for the first time, was the Colorado Kush. My mind was blown. Flavors.
Yeah, and I tried that with you this week a little bit.
The flavors.
It was good.
Just gonna say, seek that. There you go.
Yeah, I've seen some. I'm a big fan of the citrus. So I like Tangy, I like Agent Orange. I like, some of those that really they're gassy. We say gassy, means very odoriferous, very smelly.
Yeah.
And I love to open up a bag and catch that almost medicine-y scent coming out of there. In fact, Cocoa Extracts has produced air fresheners for your automobile in a Tangy scent, so that you can hang one from your rear view or from someplace that's not going to get you pulled over by the cops. And you can enjoy that scent all week long.
Ooh.
Pretty awesome.
Nice.
Pretty awesome.
That is awesome. So
Sounds
this
like
is a show
something we all need.
dedicated to, representing, the positive reform of cannabis, right? Supporting the recreational use of cannabis. We got the pleasure of having Rick Thompson and Jamie Lowell in the studio at most times. And if you don't know who they are, they have quite the rep. Rick, what are some of the main things that you would say that make you most stand out as an advocate for the as an advocate? Since I can't say recreational today, as we can tell.
Well, I've been doing medical since 2009. I started the Michigan Medical Marijuana Magazine in 2009. The first monthly publication in Michigan, specifically catering to the cannabis lifestyle. It was very successful. We had a cover price on it, lasted until about 2011. It was, we really allowed the community to develop more fully because of the magazine and because of other magazines too. At that particular time, the Midwest Cultivator with Charmy Golston was being put out. That she got hers out like 1 month before ours, and she was doing a quarterly. And then Ben Horner started the MMM report in 2010, so he was shortly after ours. But that's a communication tool that was essential to build up a sense of obligation and responsibility in the state. Jamie began the Third Coast dispensary in Ypsilanti in 2009 with some other folks. And they also played a crucial role, too, because they, in 2009, had the first real medical marijuana conference. There was one in Detroit, too, which was a pretty interesting gig. But they did theirs at the main golf club right there in town, at the Eagles.
Hey, Rick, I think his ears were ringing as you spoke of him. Jamie, are you there?
I am here. I came right into Rick discussing conferences, or I didn't catch what was going on before, and I was just listening to try to hear what was going on and to be soothed by the mellifluous tones of Rick Thompson's voice.
Maleficent tones, I think, is probably more like it. But Derek had asked about if people weren't familiar with you and I, how they would know that we were, cannabis studs. My words, not his. So the fact is, in 2009, there were a lot of confused people. We just had the medical marijuana law. The state was beginning to issue licenses, but they didn't get the cards out promptly. The state program was in a shambles. People were still being arrested, even though they had their card, because many police agencies weren't honoring the card. At that time, it was important for people to stand up to defend patients. And Jamie Lowell did that. His conference at the Eagle Crest Resort in Ypsilanti was designed to help bring people into a better knowledge space, right? Because if you think you know what the medical marijuana law means, but everybody else you run into says something's different, you don't really know. And it was a crucial opportunity for community to be formed. So in 2009 and in 2010, we were still doing our thing. In 2010, we formed MAC as a result of raids on medical marijuana distribution centers in multiple locations, and not just the 3 raids that happened in September, but there were many others too. So Michigan Association of Compassion Centers featured Jamie's Third Coast and my Big Daddies as anchors, along with Ryan Basor's Lansing Place and Magdalena Cox with the Green Bee.
Wes Crumbie, County.
Yeah, Wes, absolutely. And Kevin Spitler with Med Joint and Kalamazoo came along too. You got to give credit to a lot of the folks in Ann Arbor that were helping us out as well. So when we start
Reverend
looking
Wayne
at
Daggett, the Trevino, people tried different ways of doing this, but it was coming on. And then we learned, sorry to interrupt with your line of thought there, but then we learned that it largely is going to depend on where you are, the tolerance of the local prosecutor and whatever community you're in as to how well you'll fit in for how long.
And at the first, in 2009, we sort of felt like having a medical marijuana card meant you could say "fuck you" to the police, right? Like they would pull you over and you just shove your card up against your still rolled up car window and you could laugh at them and drive away. Because we weren't really very, very well educated, and it became real obvious to people immediately that what we thought the card meant and what cops thought the card meant weren't the same thing. And so you see all through 2009 Bob Redden's situation too. God, you can't talk about 2009 without talking about Redden. And
which was a pre-card scenario, and the first time that the affirmative defense was used and successfully. Yep. That took a turn for worse directly thereafter, but that was a milestone at the moment.
Absolutely. And, there was one of those touchstone moments where bad stuff was happening to Bob, and the people that knew about it could either do nothing or they could do something. And you know what we did? We did something. We did more than something. We did a lot of something. We had Redden rallies. We featured all kinds of protests. In the early days, media, like social media, wasn't as prevalent as it is nowadays. In 2009 and 2010, Facebook didn't rule everything. You did not have a president that utilized Twitter in order to make declarations about his country and other nations. So our methods of communication were really important. Third Coast TV at that time, producing some videos to document some things, doing some crucial interviews as well. I looked at Renee Emery Wolf, and it makes me a little sad. She gave everything she had to the community, even before medical. So Jamie and I were very fortunate to be able to work with Renee for a while before she passed. In different ways, we worked with her. But so when you look at
I just want to intervene here because we were talking a little bit about the history and how things got going in 2009 and 2010. We brought up MAC, and we brought up the people who got things up and running originally with the First Industry Association and to be pioneers in their relative areas for dispensing. And I happen to be sitting here in an office right now with Ryan Basor and Wes Crumby, also, of course, with Michigan marijuana law experts who are sponsors of our show whenever that comes together. But we have these guys here right now, and just to say hi to people because we just referenced them. So, Ryan, what do you got?
Hi, Rick. Great to be on here, and I'm looking forward to be back in Michigan marijuana and talking about it. And in 2018, real exciting times.
And for those who know Ryan's history, for him to be able to say that is very significant. We've talked a little bit about it on the show, and we'll revisit it again after that. But Wes Crumby, what do you got going on?
Nothing, Rick. How are you, man? Good to be back. It's been a long, long battle.
When we start looking back at some of the people that we could consider heroes in the movement, a lot of us that had centers in 2009 and 2010 took big chances in MAC. Mr. Basor paid the ultimate price. Some serious manipulation of circumstance happens, and he ended up having to go away. Wes was a real integral part of the Michigan Association of Compassion Centers and provided some leadership at a time when we were faced with some very difficult decisions. To have the four of us on the line right now all together, this is sort of a little reunion. That's badass. I love it.
Yeah, it's all good. And, of course, Wes stayed indirectly involved by having smoke shops and waiting for an opportunity to come back in, and the MMFLA has provided that. And so everybody's back in and ready to move forward with this new program.
We talked a little bit about that, too, earlier, because there's a new directive that came out from Licensing and Regulatory Affairs just before the holiday, and it outlines some new forms for patients and caregivers to use, but also some new costs associated with the program. And Derek and I talked about spending some time on a big segment with this, and it seems like a natural segue. When you talk about caregivers, the hydroponic stores or the patient services industry, it's been pretty important to being able to keep the 12 plant patients involved, keep them in the know, keep them supplied properly. But the industry has evolved so amazingly fast. The technology is much better now. The amount of equipment and accessories and books available are so much greater than they were back then. But we're hoping that we don't see a dip in the number of caregivers before we see the new MMFLA program completely rolled out. The new fees for caregivers would only apply when you're re-registering. So with the 2-year registration program, most of the people probably won't be registering in the first quarter or in the second quarter of 2018. So we're looking at maybe we're going to keep our caregiver numbers consistent throughout 2018.
Are you talking about based on the information that was released by LARA defining current MMMA rules, clarifying, if you will, and in the inclusion of a new charge? Is that what you were referring to? Do you ever talk about that at all, or is that something completely different?
No, that's what I was referencing. I was trying to draw 2 different conversations together. One of them was whether or not caregivers are going to be successful or whether they're going to decline in 2018. And the other is about the caregiver charges, because the Licensing and Regulatory Affairs did put a new charge on registrations, and that would be an additional $25 that patients are required to pay if they register for the program with a caregiver already attached to their patient status. Previously, they did not have to pay that $25. And the other charge comes in when you change your caregiver. When a patient adds a caregiver or when they remove a caregiver, there was previously a $25 charge. Licensing and Regulatory Affairs is raising it to $35. Now, the question becomes not is $10 extra too much or is $25 extra too much, but how much is too much? For example, the Michigan Medical Marijuana Fund, which is a fund fueled exclusively by the overpayment of patient and caregiver registration fees, currently sits at about $34 million. So they've got plenty of money in the bank. They took in $10 million in fiscal 2017, but only spent $4.5 million on the administration of the program, which means they're receiving twice as much as they're spending. So what's the motive to raise rates on caregiver registration fees? It can't be because they need extra money.
I just want to go back a little bit further. So we're talking about adding $10 onto the 25 and adding a charge at the point of origin, meaning when the patient originally signs up, you used to be able just to add your caregiver at that time with an attestation for free. Now there's a charge. But in the beginning, this was all $10. And yes, things got doubled to 2 years for the term of the licensing. But even without good cause then, it went up over twice as much to the $25 that we're talking about now. So this isn't the first time additional charges have been added on without any real justification.
And with the clear statistical information that they have plenty of money to run the program, even if they were to allocate the entire $3 million allocation that's set aside on an annual basis to fund local police agencies to enforce or inform about the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, even if you included that, they're still making money. So there's no financial defined need to raise these rates. So this comes back to what Jamie and I and Ryan and Wes have seen for years and years, which is a consistent message coming from government that they want to eliminate the caregiver system, specifically from law enforcement and from certain conservative legislators. What their thought is they don't like the fact that people can grow cannabis in residential locations. They don't like the Michigan Medical.
Well, more to the point, they get a lot of pressure from the big money influences through their lobbyists, believing that these home grows are direct competition to their commercial investments, which we don't agree with. But that's a lot of the thinking behind trying to eliminate the home grows.
Yeah, well, and that's the current language. But, we've seen, you and I, Jamie, in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, long before there was any postulated legal cultivation system, the cops hated home growth. They really wanted to get rid of it. They wanted to eliminate the caregiver system. And what we heard in testimony was that when there was a legal regulated system of cultivation and distribution, that they would eventually phase out the caregivers because they just don't like it. Now, I think that you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't put the smoke back in the joint, as I sometimes like to say. So there's no way you can take away caregiving from people who've enjoyed it for 10 years. It'll be very difficult for them to do. But you can price people out of the market, can't you?
You can, and some caregivers obviously are built so that what they don't need immediately for directly connected patients is desired by others who don't normally have that kind of access. And that type of thing is going to create higher risk, and there'll be less of that kind of action. And so those caregivers who are really kind of depending on that will probably just stop or dramatically scale down. And there's going to be a big change for caregivers. I mean, we hope to keep some numbers, but there will be a big change for caregivers coming up here.
I got to think we'll see scaling down more than people stopping, because at heart, every caregiver out there, I believe, is a cannabis consumer themselves, and they still have a desire to cultivate for their own behalf, even if they're no longer able to financially afford to cultivate on behalf of other patients. So I think you'll still see a ton of people out there still doing it, just not 72. 72 was a baller kind of a move in the first place. So I don't think a lot of people have an idea of what space it takes to grow 72 plants. It's a large operation that requires daily attention. It's risky financially to do. Almost anything could happen to your crop. You could have a power failure. We have wind chills below zero in Michigan for a whole week here. If you have a problem in your building structure, you could lose your entire garden. So, more moderate-sized gardens will be the way things go in the future.
I agree, man. I'm kind of involved in a couple conversations here, wrapping up what I'm doing right now. But in fact, I'm going to have to sign off for a couple of minutes here. I haven't heard from Derek. Let's get Derek's voice in there. And there he is. That sounds like him. All right.
Derek, and in the studio we have Chris, too.
Yes, how you guys doing? Thank you. So that was good. I love to hear you guys just kind of go on a little tangent there. I feel like the listeners can really gain from such things.
I even feel like I learned a little bit.
So I'm still here, just in case you were wondering. Jamie, what'd you say? You got to take off?
I have to
I believe.
Get off the phone here just for a second, wrap up some stuff I'm doing here up in Bay City, and get on the road. I'm on the road for some of the second hour of the show. I'll be happy to call back in and participate. But right now I got to duck out just for a few minutes. Probably almost time for a break, and it's certainly time for Derek to start stepping up here a little bit. The what used to be mellifluous tones of Rick Thompson's voice are now becoming kind of droning irritants.
Whoa! He just dissed the entire team all with one foul swoop. Did he, or was it just me?
Yeah, I think he kind of got us all there. It's Attack of the Drones, though, Jamie. I'm in a Star Wars dress, so
that's meant as a compliment, by the way.
Don't
take that out of context.
What?
All right, well, go do what you got to do, and then we'll catch you when you're in the car, man.
I'll be back on in just a few. Talk to you soon.
And we're all going to take a short break here. Rick Thompson will be back with us at 5 o'clock with the news, as always. That's something I'm excited for. So stick around. We'll be back just before then, probably around 4:55, 4:57, and then we'll get right into that. Enjoy your break, because I know I will. All right, we're back. It's the Jazz Cabbage Cafe. What's up, Rick? You still with us?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, cool. So, man, we're back. It's, it's about that time. 2 minutes till one of the greatest parts of our show. One of the greatest segments of our show is Rick Thompson reading the news. So, yeah, man. Sorry I was away for so long as you and Jamie discussed those things. I was just entranced within the conversation, as I'm sure our listeners were as well.
I love history. I love the History Channel. I like reading about the American Revolution, Civil War. We all love to look back on it, and it's kind of cool to be able to talk history with people that were actually there. So,
I got a short discussion now. this is like history of history. But basically, we talked about this, we touched on this, and I just want to retouch on it. We were talking about the holy oil of anointment. And I was only talking about it in weeks prior because it was Christmas time coming up. But they say,
Do you want to do that after the news, man? Because it's about 5.
well, dude, I didn't know you were that into it. I was going to make it super duper short, but hell, hey, let's do that. Let's make a longer convo out of it. Without further ado, Rick with the news.
Hey, everybody, it's the Cannabis News. I'm Rick Thompson. It's January 2nd, 2018. And in honor of the new year, why don't we look at some of the great opportunities and perhaps pitfalls 2018 could offer the medical marijuana community on a national basis. I'm stealing most of this information from Marijuana Business Daily, an article called A Look Ahead Challenges Opportunities for Marijuana Professionals in the New Year. One of the big things in 2018 will be California. It's already the world's largest marijuana market, but California's conversion from a 2-decades-old medical cannabis gray market to a fully regulated marijuana industry isn't going to be easy. Some companies will have to make big changes to the way they've been doing business for years. Others will find themselves suddenly in the black market or out of business entirely. Marijuana activists have argued for decades that California will tip the scales of national drug policy, and 2018 could reveal if that's true, and that entire same thing could be said about the state of Michigan. Another giant entering the regulated adult use marijuana market in 2018 will be Canada. That's right, Canada, our neighbor to the north. The nation is well on its way to becoming the first group of 7 nations to legalize adult use marijuana. Regulations related to marijuana will dominate Canadian national discussion in the first half of 2018, when every province and territory is expected to finalize cannabis production and sales rules. Now, those sales could start before the first leaves fall in September, and marijuana entrepreneurs around the world are scrambling to capitalize on Canada's legalization, and that will likely continue well into 2019 and beyond. Here's another thing, talking about the evolution of cannabis and its acceptance. Alcohol joins the party. Marijuana's age-old rival, alcohol, is starting to see opportunity instead of threat in the cannabis industry. In the new year, could alcohol companies whether to step up investments? One of the biggest boozers in the world, Constellation Brands, well, they just purchased a significant stake in Canopy Growth. Canopy Growth is an Ontario-based company. They'll enter the recreational cannabis industry when Canada begins sales. U.S. beer makers are going to expand their experiments with cannabis. How's this? Adding terpenes to supercritical IPA is La Guintas Brewing in California. Other makers are expected to follow suit. Wine producers are adding tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, not just the non-intoxicating cannabinoids like those beer pussies are. Rebel Coast Winery of Sonoma, California has launched the world's first alcohol-removed cannabis-infused wine. Oh, yeah. Rebel Coast plans to introduce CBD-infused wines in 2018. Expect a ton of attention on these canna alcohol products in 2018. Influential market data analyst Global Data warned alcohol makers in November legalization of recreational marijuana presents a threat, as drinkers may swap alcohol for cannabis. Why not? You don't have a hangover and you don't crash your car. Now, it'll be hard to surpass the magnitude of legalization in 2016 with so many states adopting rec legislation. But 2018 will be a historic year, too, not just because of the number of states or market size involved, but because of how legalization comes about. Action through state legislatures, which we don't see. New Jersey, Vermont, and Rhode Island are all candidates for the historic honor of being the first to legalize cannabis through action of your state legislature. New Jersey lawmakers already have a bill to work with from last session, while incoming Governor Phil Murphy campaigned partly on the promise to legalize cannabis. Vermont Governor Phil Scott vetoed a rec bill last year. Dick said in December he's comfortable with signing a more limited rec bill into law that will permit possession and home grow, and that may happen as early as January. Dark horse status goes to Rhode Island. There's strong legislative support for legalization, but the governor has been far more reluctant to support recreational. pressure from the looming rec market in neighboring Massachusetts could make the difference there. Now, voters always seem to be a step ahead of the politicians when it comes to cannabis. So although having legislators do it is a nice change, the old-fashioned way, petition drives, that's how it's been done mostly. Even if legislators start approving rec marijuana laws in 2018, several more states are still going to pass medical or recreational laws through the petitioning process. Ohio might try it again. Michigan will definitely do it this year. Voters in Missouri, Oklahoma, and Utah also could look at medical marijuana. Now, I happen to know that North Dakota has an active movement too, and a petition drive for legalization there too. Now, when we start talking about some of the legalization schemes, what we're really talking about here are dollars. And how about $250 million? MedMen is a Los Angeles-based investment firm, one of the best-known names in the cannabis industry. They have a push to raise what may be the largest capital investment securing in U.S. cannabis industry history. Now, San Francisco-based Poseidon also trying to raise $150 million. Now, that's $400 million out of two really well-known companies, and they might do it too. Marijuana observers will also be watching to see if the canna-centric finance firms can land some institutional capital, the big money guys that have been hesitant to jump in to support cannabis businesses before. 2018 could be big too because of Congress. Don't forget about Congress. That growth in 2018 could be due to maybe another historic first. There could be a bipartisan bill to repeal 280E tax restrictions for legal MJ businesses. That might make it to Trump's desk. There might even be some other legislative measure that would further legitimize the U.S. marijuana sector. Now, there have been dozens of pro-marijuana bills introduced in Congress, but none of them have even gotten a full congressional committee hearing. But with more and more Republicans coming on board to support different cannabis bills, such a victory isn't nearly as pie in the sky as it was a few years ago. Now, partisan gridlock in D.C. is legendary, but the industry can't ignore what's going on in Capitol Hill. Neither can the banking industry, which is looking for the federal government to make some changes to ease their ways. However, in the meantime, a Colorado-based credit union for the marijuana industry is going to try again to revolutionize banking for the cannabis industry. Now, currently, there's a Colorado credit union serving the marijuana industry in 6 states. They plan to expand to 20 in 2018. That's Partner Colorado Credit Union Safe Harbor Private Banking Program. But another group, Fourth Corner Credit Union, is trying a new strategy. Instead of serving businesses that touch the plant, serve marijuana advocacy groups. Great idea. Fourth Corner will find out in the new year if their plan works. Here's how they're doing it in Hawaii. The private banking program is getting a big test there where regulators have banned cash transactions. They force customers to use the credit union's Can Pay app in order to buy marijuana. If that's successful in Hawaii, more states might ban cash transactions until federal authorities get off their ass and ease cannabis banking restrictions. But even independent of that, there's another opportunity in 2018 for social use lounges. When social consumption lounges are expected to make their first appearances in 2018, Denver might see one by 2018, and Vegas could be next. Now, the opening of these first licensed and registered social use lounges could trigger an explosion of more of this business style. Many states and jurisdictions say they're interested, but they're waiting for other people to do it first before they start their own regulations for social lounges. Maybe by 2019, cannabis clubs could be an entire new business category in multiple states. Now, CBD, cannabidiol, has always been a favorite topic of marijuana advocates. We talk about its medicinal qualities and how it doesn't deserve to be lumped in with THC on Schedule 1. Other people think that might be right, too. The CBD market's going to change dramatically in 2018. A lawsuit to be settled in a federal appeals court will determine whether CBD is a controlled substance even at all. Now, it could just be legal as long as it's derived from hemp. The U.S. DEA, of course, opposes that. Any decision by this court could vault CBD products into the mainstream or A negative result could limit market opportunities to states where marijuana is only legal. Another CBD question to be settled in 2018 is in Canada. Canada's planning to authorize CBD hemp extraction along with adult use marijuana, and that change could have global repercussions. Canada is believed to be the world's #2 hemp producer, and some predict a flood of cheap Canadian hemp-derived CBD products will affect global CBD market prices. And finally, if we look at internationally, the global marijuana industry will be keeping a close watch on 2 different health agencies in 2018. UN World Health Organization and the U.S. FDA. The World Health Organization called a May summit, May 2018, to review cannabis and how it's regulated. Now, this agency doesn't make any laws, but its conclusions heavily influence drug policy among its member nations, over 60 of those. The agency's upcoming review of cannabis extracts and tinctures could trigger revisions to the 1961 UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, which the United States forced everybody to sign. Any revisions could dramatically shake up the global cannabis market. But, there's another cannabis industry shaking health decision for the U.S. coming from the FDA. The agency is due to issue a decision on GW Pharma's Epidiolex, which is a cannabis-derived drug trying to treat 2 rare kinds of epilepsy. The FDA's decision could have ramifications for all marijuana users because, if approved, cannabis would be the first plant-derived cannabidiol approved by the agency, poking the biggest hole yet in the U.S. position that the cannabis plant has no medical use, which is the only reason why it is on Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances List. And that is an extremely long session of the cannabis news for January 2nd, 2018. I'm Rick Thompson. Thanks for listening. There's Cabbage Cafe.
Now, do you rehearse that? What's the deal? That is really,
No.
You read that really good. 10 minutes of good reading, I must say.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I will also say, I hear a little bit of difference in Rick's voice this week. What do you think?
I don't know.
I think you sound.
I am using a new microphone. Is that maybe it?
I don't think so. I think you sound more chipper, as if you're glowing or something. I don't think your news is quite complete yet either, right? Because I wanted. So first, we all celebrate one number together. 2 numbers. We celebrate 420, and we celebrate 710. We do. And that's a really important number to me. If you know me personally, that number means a lot to me. And now it also means a lot to Rick, because that was the time that his grandson was born.
Granddaughter
Sorry,
Morgan.
Rick. Congratulations on your new granddaughter, Rick.
Thank you. By the way, my title officially is the Grand Hottie. I'm not grandfather. I'm Grand Hottie. So we could just, we'll go with that.
Grand Hottie. And the reason I said grandson is, trying to protect her off the rip,
Right. Yeah. Morgan Sue Helen is a beautiful little girl. My youngest son is a proud father, and Mom Kayla is both mom and baby are doing great. Thank you very much for pointing that out. I had a huge upswell of support on Facebook when I posted pictures of her. It's really nice to see. Sometimes people give me a lot of shit on Facebook, but it's nice to see when people are coming out in droves to say good things.
Yes. Well, that's a very good thing. So congratulations again. And that was an amazing news read. So hell yeah. All around killing it today. But yeah, we're still here. Still doing this dang show. And before that segment of yours, we were talking about the holy oil of anointment, which you and I have had multiple discussions about. But I felt like, why not do it here for the listeners? Chris, have you in tune with this at all? The holy oil of anointment. You know anything about this?
What? No, I don't think so.
Well, some say
that
back in the Jesus days, that Jesus was actually, blessing people or using cannabis oil to either heal people or bless people. And it was referred to possibly in the Bible as the holy oil of anointment. Some people are saying that that's possibly what the Bible was referring to.
Okay. Well,
A very intelligent person I know is Gersh Avery. Peanut butter. He does peanut butter topical oil. You ever heard of that?
peanut butter topical oil?
Yeah.
I have not. No.
Rick has. Rick, you heard of that?
Well, peanut butter is the whip. That man is so smart, and his oil works so well for a variety of different things too.
Nice.
So he believes what I'm saying to be true.
Okay.
And also, I saw a segment on Vice just before Christmas, man. This is, Jesus Christ. Some say that name. And I don't want to be super religious on you guys. But the Christ itself can translate directly to the anointed one. Who knows?
I don't know.
What oil were they using? Was it ever truly defined? Rick, what do you know about this?
Cannabis.
Here's what I know is that the technology to extract oil from hemp existed in pre-Christ times. So that was technology that was available at that time. We tend to think of Jerusalem and things in sort of desert type of a thing, camels and all that stuff. But the reality is that on the east coast of the Mediterranean, there's very fertile farmland in Israel, in the Gaza, in the Sinai. So there are some places where you could absolutely have hemp cultivated. We also know that cultures around that time utilized hemp as a source of fiber for clothing as well as for food purposes. Now, we also know that one of the basic reasons people love hemp seed is because it's a very oil-filled seed. So whether the oil was derived from hemp seeds or not, we don't know, but it sure could have been. The other thing is, a lot of stuff historically, we don't really know what the contents are. We know about myrrh and things like that simply from biblical accounts, but that seems, pretty sketchy. We didn't really get a formula for its construct. We just learned about what some of the additives were. It's entirely possible that hemp oil or hemp oils were included in the production of the oil, that the holy anointed oil that we're talking about here, and it was probably very commonplace. You can grow hemp and get production from it in a relatively fast way. So,
Man.
Yeah.
it's very common.
Lots of good points there.
We should just skip everything that we've ever done for this movement and just go straight to trying to prove that biblical fact. Get all the get all the religious people on our side. We should just do that.
Well, one thing that it's easy to fall into the hemp was so important, it was definitely there kind of a thing. Sometimes the reality turns out to be different. I'm sure many of you have heard that the Constitution was written on hemp paper, and that's not true. The Constitution was not written on hemp paper, but early drafts of the Constitution were. Hemp paper was like a stock paper. It's not a finishing paper, right? So it's like a rough, coarse paper that you would write notes on because if you needed to toss it away, you could because it wasn't that difficult to produce. But when you really wanted a document to be durable, you'd put it on a substance like parchment that absorbs the ink and it stays there. And hemp is just not suitable for that. So we see a lot of myths about cannabis, both pro and negative. I would like to find out more information about the holy anointed oil so that it goes out of myth status and becomes factual.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's it's always had me interested, and I don't know if it was just like the season, like I said, that has me just recently really pondering it. But Gersh would be a perfect person to call in. I'm going to reach out to him myself, and maybe you should too, Rick. Maybe we can actually get him to call in. And again, the number is 313-879-5059. The Jazz Cabbage Cafe. Everybody's welcome to call in. And I just want to remind you, this is a pretty chill show. Into the fact we don't even screen the phone calls. They're eventually going to make me stop saying that. But to be honest, you could just call in. We're going to answer. You could say something crazy as ever. And then just hang up. It wouldn't even matter. You know what I'm saying? So call in and don't do that. Say something like, I think a good theme for today's callers could be almost like one we had last week. I think the one that we should do this week, though, should just be a personal story, something that you have witnessed yourself where somebody was deeply impacted by cannabis and it affected their life in a positive way. So even if you're a non-cannabis user, you may know somebody where you could be like, I saw cannabis help them. I wouldn't consume cannabis myself, but I saw it help them. So if you have any of those stories, we'd be super interested to hear it. especially if they're about yourself. Rick, anything that you can think of, maybe even recently? I know you're in the game, so you see stuff every day, which is probably one of your motivations behind working so hard for the movement. But
I was just going to say, I've seen a lot of kind of fantastic health situations with cannabis. Michael McShane comes to mind, and McShane has, HIV and a bunch of different other things, including skin cancers. And we documented the use of Rick Simpson oil and how it actually was drawing cancers out of the skin. It was, over time, it was intriguing. I wrote an article which still makes me kind of tear up a little bit, called Tough Guy, all the way back in 2011, about a patient who was confined to his own hospital bed in his home and had been given just a short time to live and started cannabis treatments and had extended his life. I think everyone involved in his treatment knew that it wasn't a solution, but it did give him extra life beyond anything that the doctors had any hope for. And it was a quality of life, too. Although he eventually did succumb to his illnesses, when you look at that, I mean, that's a proof statement. We have people in our community that advocate for the use of cannabis medicines in hospice, at end-of-life situations. And I'm very sympathetic to that because I'm sure it can be helpful there. But all you have to do is go on YouTube and hit, type in cannabis cures and then watch videos. Watch people talk about it. It's miraculous. It's so widespread, and there are so many people across the United States, Canada, the world, who post these videos of their own healing. It's impossible to be a sham. You couldn't get all those people together on the same program. Everybody is doing it. Everybody's talking about it because, man, when you're on the brink of death or critical illness, and then you are saved from that, don't you want everybody to know what saved you? Don't you feel obligated to share this knowledge with everyone else that might suffer? So,
I think so.
I definitely would.
When I need a heartwarming story, just go to YouTube and watch some videos, man. Amazing, especially the videos of the kids, the poor kids that have tremor issues, or the non-verbal communication autism children, and the way that using different oils as dietary supplements brings them out of that state and allows them to interact more. It's the best.
Well, I've seen a lot myself too. When we're shooting those Third Coast TV things, I remember the one person that sticks out to me most is Renee Wolf.
Yeah. Yep. She was an amazing person.
Yeah, and she did so much for the movement. We spoke about her so much before, but if you were to Google any individual on your own, you could just Google her name, Renee Wolf, and she is amazing. She showed up to everything. She was there protesting when it, could have been considered impossible to even get there, right? So, awesome. A lot of people. She was a big name, just like you, Rick. You guys were together with that stuff. So.
Well, what Renee did back before there was a medical, because to be honest with you, I got involved with my cannabis activism after we already passed a medical marijuana law. Renee and people like Adam Brooke and Matt Abel, they practiced activism before there was any legal basis for that. I mean, that's big props to that. But Renee took it a step further. She actually fired up a joint inside a United States House Representative's office in Washington, D.C.
I'm so happy you're telling us.
Renee Wolf, those of you who don't know, she was in a wheelchair. So she's the perfect person to be able to pull something like that off, because we can complain about a wheelchair person smoking a joint. It was revolutionary, and it really endeared her to people across the nation and made a statement to people and inspired activism all over.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping that you'd tell that story. I was trying to lead you into the doobie being fired up. I mean, we got a video of her telling the story on Third Coast TV. I believe Third Coast TV is still circulating on YouTube. If you just did with the number Third Coast TV on YouTube, all one word, and you'll find these old videos. Rick, you're in some of those. You should look it up yourself.
Yeah, I have. I have seen some of those videos. I haven't seen some of them in a long time, though. God damn, I looked good. That's all I can say. Wow. I'm just kidding. I'm just messing around.
If you guys want a sample of what Rick looks like, you can always go to the Jazz Cabbage Cafe Facebook, where there are pictures of Rick. Rick, who is that wonderful photographer that took some pictures of you that day?
Jeanette Warner of Jeanette Warner Photography from Linden, Michigan.
She was
Jeanette,
amazing.
Fantastic.
Such good work.
Yep,
such good work.
Great.
And Rick, you're a photographer yourself. You know what the hell you're talking about. I'm a photographer myself. Chris is a freaking photographer. Everybody in this room is a damn photographer, and we all say she did a great job. So hell yes.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. A lot of people take pictures, but not a lot of people are really photographers. In order to be a photographer, you have to study your craft. You have to be the kind of guy that kneels down in front of a display of lenses for your camera and trying to figure out exactly how much money you can steal out of your budget in order to buy that fucking thing you want. That's a photographer. A guy that takes shots while he happens to be at places, that's cool. Those are situational photos. I mean, and I think you and Chris and I, we're that kind of guy that pays attention to their equipment, that studies their craft, that learns about it, and takes their art to the next level. Because photography, when it's done, in the way I just described, it is art. Wouldn't you agree?
Hey man, I told you you had a glow about you today, Rick. See? Just going to keep proving it, aren't you?
Yeah. I know. 2018, I'm trying to throw off all of the self-hate from 2017 and move forward. We'll see if it's successful.
I'm sure we'll. So let's get into that a little bit, because there are going to be a lot of people listening to the show that aren't really sure exactly what to expect as we go into this year, 2018. Here we are, and this is a huge year for our movement, because of not only the recreational use of cannabis being on the ballot, but we also have politicians going into office who really support what we're doing. So I think it's important for everybody to fully understand what 2018 is all about. And even though it's not till November, there's still a lot that can be done.
January is going to be a real ride for the medical marijuana community here in Michigan. Lara is taking applications for the MMFLA program, and we have another licensing board hearing in the third week of January. That's going to be interesting because it'll be the first licensing board hearing after they've received applications, and we should actually hear them talking about some of the apps and what they've received so far. But also, Michigan Normal always does a poll of the citizens of Michigan on the subject of cannabis law reform, and that'll be done again this year. And we're also expecting to get the Secretary of State and the Bureau of Elections to approve the MI legalized petitions to ensure that the question of adult use of marijuana in Michigan is on the ballot in 2018. So, bam, right off the bat, we're going to have a ton of stuff to talk about.
Now, when we're talking about adult, we're obviously talking 18, correct?
No, MI legalized is 21 years of age.
21 years of age. All right, we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
What are the other disclaimers with it? What can we expect with the law change? So recreational means, is it 2.5 ounces that you can carry on you still?
Right. Michigan's proposal would be one of the most liberal, if not the most liberal in the nation.
I did read
that. Jamie, how you doing, man?
I'm doing all right.
Locked. So, for example, if you have a 12, because you're giving you a 12-plant garden, and everybody that's been involved in cannabis knows as soon as you harvest a 12-plant garden, you have more than 2.5 ounces. Well, we're smart, so we made an allowance for that to say that you can have an unlimited amount that you create for yourself as long as it's under lock and key. So if you're one of those guys that likes to cure his cannabis for 6 months before he smokes it because you're a connoisseur and that's the way that you return all the terpenes and all the flavor and all the scent right back to it, then you can do that and be protected, right? As long as it's locked up, it's nobody's issue.
Jamie Lowell, the great Jamie Lowell, is here with us. What's up, dog? Here?
I am back. Sounded like Rick was talking about the CRMLA, that you can keep whatever you produce.
He was.
You do. Yep. 10%. 10 ounces does not have to be under lock and key, but the rest of it does, and that's fine. And what defines that doesn't have to be some grand vault room or something like that. Just make it a reasonable attempt to keep the stuff separate and combined somewhere. Was the basic idea. But it's cool. It's we would all like to have things be a lot better in almost every aspect of these things that we're talking about, but we have functional ways of getting things started here, and hopefully we'll get to something that more aligns itself with the nature of cannabis instead of all these extra regulations and restrictions and crap like that. But these are a reality for now as we get started. It's still very exciting.
Are you talking about regulations in terms of just the amount that you can have at the house?
Yeah, commercially and for individual. This is a big step forward for individual rights. You don't have to be a patient or caregiver to grow 12 plants in a house after the passage of this. You don't have to be a license holder to be out and about with 2.5 ounces. And if you are up to certain amounts, it remains like a civil infraction and hopefully not of very much interest to police who are trying to actually keep the peace and look for real crime. Of course, that's one of the motivations behind doing this too, is to try to redirect some resources to more sensible things. And it's a big deal. It's not exactly where we would like to see it go. We tried for something a little bit better in 2016, came up short. The abrogate people are trying for something a lot more loose right now than what we're proposing, but this can happen, and it's really real. And we look at it as the start. It's still really good. I mean, comparatively to other states, we have a pretty good law in line coming up here next year.
Well,
no doubt.
That's amazing. I mean, so all right, getting back.
Well, let's talk about this just for a second, though. Let's compare our legalization program to what's being proposed for a petition drive in Ohio. Jamie, what are they going to let them have in Ohio? 4 fucking plants?
Yeah, somebody was whoever the. Okay, so it's a little background. There was a ballot initiative underway that MPP was involved in. It was fairly decent as far as language goes. And then the legislature passed kind of a very restrictive measure, and the ballot initiative effort was just dropped. And a lot of people were upset by that. But nonetheless, they did get something started. And one of the people who kind of engineered the stuff to the legislature and dropping of the ballot initiative was denied himself a license during the application process, and is now motivated to want to do another initiative and go to legalization. And when he talked about doing that, he talked about adding in an Oregon-based model of 4 plants. That said, knowing that Michigan's doing this now, it might have some influence on what they end up doing in Ohio. But for right now, they're talking about the Oregon 4-plant model.
Right. My point being that if we're trying to gauge where Michigan's program is versus other programs and how liberal it is, our closest neighbor, our neighbor to the south, they're trying a very restrictive thing. Ohio's program does not allow flower for combustion; it only allows flower for vaporization. So they're definitely not nearly as liberal as we are, either in our medical program or in our legalization proposal as well. So.
I'm sure they're saying the same things that I was just saying, but it's even worse than us. So there's a perfect example right there. I mean, I'm sure they're going, well, at least we can have flower, stuff like that. But, to not be able to smoke it would be kind of an affront to most of us here who have been working on this. But this is what you have to do. These incremental gains are frustrating. And, of course, there's been a complexity thrown in by the big money interests who want legalization but just want to totally control the market, and that's not good enough for us either.
No, but in Ohio, though, what we saw was some significant manipulation of circumstance with previous cannabis law reform movements. A responsible Ohio wanted to institute just 10 large cultivation centers across the entire state, and that they had already decided which locations they were going to be and who was going to get them, and that failed at the ballot box. And then they turned right around, and the legislature passed a program where there ended up just being 12 gigantic cultivators, and then a second tier of other cannabis cultivators as well. So it's not a clear system there. Here's my analogy too: is that if you're a person who's hungry and you've been given an appetizer, now you're waiting for dinner. But if you're somebody who's already had your dinner, now you're just waiting for dessert. And here in Michigan, sort of, I hate to say it, but we're sort of just waiting for dessert because we've had our medical program up and running for so many years, almost a decade now, and we're used to it. In Ohio, they're going from nothing to potentially a whole lot of something, and I can understand why maybe it's a little bit too much too fast for some of those folks.
Yeah,
I guess. I mean, they've had decrim for a while. The attitude there has been pretty pro. The level of knowledge by the citizens, I think, is above average for a state, particularly one without a good program in place. And they are ready for something pretty good in Ohio. But just as we see elsewhere, it only takes a few people who sit in decision-making capacities to really hold things back or not be caught up to where the people are. And that's in part what's happening in Ohio, too. But I'm sure they'll take their incremental start and try to expand from there. It's really dysfunctional. It's going to have to get changed over time anyway.
I agree with you as far as it being dysfunctional. And when you look at some of the other state examples they have to go from, they could look to Illinois, which is, 2 states to the west. They could look at Michigan to the north. They could look at even some of the East Coast states. There's so many non-Colorado, non-California models that they could follow that would be reasonable and make sense. And the only reason I say non-California, non-Colorado models is simply because a lot of places just don't want to copy what they see in the media from those states. I've been there, to Colorado anyway, and I was very satisfied with what they had there. I thought it was perfectly integrated into the communities where it was embraced. Where Colorado fails, I think, is that not every community embraces it, and that creates an uneven distribution network.
People overthink it, and we saw that during the drafting process in Michigan. Oh, no, we can't do that. 2.5 ounces would be the most ever. And it's like, as you said, we're used to that in Michigan. Yeah, it was the medical program, but caregivers can possess up to 15 ounces, depending on their licensing scenario. Each patient can already have 2.5 ounces, although Maine's program's having a hard time because of their butthole governor to get started. It was 2.5 ounces for rec. And so people are going, oh no, we have the highest limit, but we're used to it, and it's not that, and it's already not sensational. Big deal.
But to a certain level, you have to stop paying attention to national standards and start paying attention to state history when it comes to proposals and how people are going to vote. I don't think people in Michigan give a shit about what Vermont's done or what Colorado's done. They're used to what they see in the newspaper. And Jamie and I and a lot of other people have done a good job of keeping in the press positive stories about marijuana for years and years. So people have a really elevated sense of knowledge and an educated opinion about where we're at, and they don't see 2.5 ounces as a problem. I never thought they did. Yeah. Even though Jamie, by the way, I know he won't say it himself, but Jamie's a real hero here with the CRMLA language, because Jamie and Jeff Hank and Matt Abel really were the people pushing and fighting for the more common sense approach to construction of this language when it was in discussion committee with the CRMLA program. So they really got a lot of these positives included.
And by MPP's own admission, they were trying to sell language off to people. I mean, these things are expensive. A statewide ballot initiative effort is very expensive, and this out-of-state organization, MPP, also likes to bring in money to pay their people, and they are very experienced, knowledgeable people in these different areas and stuff. And so over the last few years, they've kind of changed operations to be more of a selling language out to the highest bidder. I mean, there might be some line that they won't cross or something. Where it is, I'm not sure, but they were trying to take that same philosophy in and sell some market share off to some people, and we really stood up to that and stopped that. And I like the way that Tom Levine described it recently, that we were the kind of the gatekeepers of the language during that process. We did give up quite a bit. We had to. There's lots of many interests involved. You need a lot of resources to do this. The fact that all these different interests got together at the table and created something, to get behind. It's pretty cool.
When Jamie says, selling off language to the highest bidder, it's not just a phrase. It's not just a kind of a needle or of a joke or anything. This is actually what Rob Campia, the leader of Marijuana Policy Project, said in a Marijuana Business Daily interview. He said, look, if you got the right money, you can get your language in my proposal. It all depends on if you got the right bread. And when that came out, it was shocking to all of us that have been involved in it here in the state, even though we'd suspected for a long time, and we'd known that MPP, oftentimes based their affiliations on someone's financial performance. But to hear him boldly say that as if it was matter of fact and we should just take it and shut the fuck up, that was a real slap. So this is factual. It is not, enhanced or we're not making stuff up. You can read it.
Well,
God damn it, man! I was saying some brilliant fucking shit, and I wasn't on air.
well, Rick was saying some brilliant shit too, man. So who gives a fuck? You're all right.
Well, I mean, I doubt it was anywhere near the standard that I'm kind of discussing when I threw that out there. I had a call that came in, and instead of getting rid of it, I ended up taking it, and then whoever called got to hear me spout off about how we were protecting the language. But that's basically I was reiterating and supporting Rick's point.
But wait. Before you do it, I'm sorry. We're taking a break here in studio. Do you want me to play music, or would you like to have this 5 minutes?
Holy shit. I come back in setting up a genius statement.
Yeah, we were.
And you cut me off to talk about taking a break.
We're taking a break in studio here. It's that
hear that
time on our schedule. So you have the floor, Jamie. I'm just letting you know. It's all you, man. You got to fill the time of the break.
Oh, okay. Well, normally we get this close to the end of the show and just say screw it, keep talking. So I think that's what's happening pretty much, right?
Right.
Right. You and me and the in-studio crew is going to go out back.
There you go. We have other things to deal with here in studio. We had complications, as you may not be aware of, in the beginning of the show. Our amazing listeners have stuck with us through this show, and I appreciate that. And if you're still out there listening, you can always call in. But Jamie and Rick have some very amazing things to talk about, so continue listening. They're going to do that. We're going to widget around over here, and my beautiful voice will be back to you in about 5 minutes.
So, Jamie, what was that brilliant point you were about to make before Derek announced the break? That's not a real break?
Well, what I was actually just saying and reiterating is that for those who want to nitpick or get upset with concessions or perceived concessions with the language, it was a difficult, complex scenario with many people who have a potential stake in this emerging industry, who have different ideas about how to go about it, and who have access to the same process we do, and who have a lot of resources. So the fact that we didn't get everything was kind of part and parcel with this whole process. But we did do a good job of staving off some of the really crippling ideas that were on the table at some point. And I'm not sure if I said this before it got cut off, but Tom Levine explained it on a discussion panel a few weeks ago that we were kind of like the gatekeepers of the language, and I would agree with that, and I do believe that we did a good job of holding off on some really stupid language that MPP was willing to sell off during this process.
Well, now we did hear the gatekeeper comment, but it was good to hear it a second time. I'll say this too, Jamie, is that if you were to look at the initial document that was presented by MPP, the initial version of the language, and then you look at what we have now, you can see how radically different it is, and positively and negatively. But those positive changes were brought about by hard negotiations by you and the men I mentioned. But we wanted this whole process to begin from the "Am I legalized" language, and yep. We thought that it represented a language that was acceptable to the citizens of Michigan, and if MPP needed to make a few changes in order to get what their experts believed would be electability of the proposal, that we would work with that. And it didn't really turn out to be like that, did it, Jay?
No, it didn't. These people are really experienced. Came in and facilitated this process. They generally know how to deal with the locals. They've been in situations where there's been something underway before, a la Arizona, a la Maine, a la Las Vegas, Nevada, I should say. And knowing how to, like, work out deals, knowing how to, like, level of experience, for good and bad, I should say. They did a good job in some areas, putting us in the right direction, and sometimes they went the other way, probably more for other people's interests' sake than ours. They were really good at it. I forgot the original question there.
You're referencing some concessions to the alcohol and tobacco industry, and my original point was that we started with a document that looks very different from the language that's going to be before the voters at this time.
Yeah, and that was my point. We wanted to do that. We were all set to do that, and they did a good job redirecting, for better or worse, on that because of the way that they're used to dealing with these dynamics of different interests and that kind of stuff. I would say MPP did two really good things, in my opinion, and that is get a lot of different interests on the same page and bring in a drafter, an attorney named Heather Aziz, who is very experienced and knowledgeable in these things, and whenever possible, really did try to help us out, in terms of trying to be more broad and liberal in our approach, while trying to keep the interests of the others at bay or in mind as well. She was given a really tough task, and I think she did a really good job under those circumstances. So I'm happy for that. But
right.
But we could not start where we were because there were just way too many interests. That would be like one stake in the whole thing, getting preferential treatment to get started, and the other interests probably would not have gone along with that. So a lot of politics involved in this whole process. And I'll say one more thing. We discussed this before. There were a couple of useless piece of shit trolls who kind of slithered up here with MPP. And you'll hear at times as they are trying to character assassinate some of us. In fact, Rick and I are two targets at times, more so Rick, that we could have gotten all this stuff that we wanted, but because of our behavior or something, we weren't able to do that because we couldn't, maintain our composure and all that kind of stuff. That is absolute bullshit. Had we not done everything we did, this language wouldn't be nearly as good as it is. I'm not sure if we'd be supporting it even, but we did a stellar job in there, and there ought to be no question about that. The only reason that these idiots are saying this is because they know that's the case. They're trying to belittle that effort.
We talked a little earlier in the program about sometimes getting flack on social media, and it's people just like Jamie just described that architect a lot of that flack. If you're trying to stop the flow of cannabis law reform, you can either attack the institutions doing cannabis law reform or attack the activists leading those institutions. And there's a philosophy that says attack the activists, and that's really what they've done.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that they've chosen people who are really well established. I would submit, even if somebody doesn't like myself or you or Jeff Hank or Kevin, our great funder, then even if they don't know that, those around here know when somebody's bullshitting about us. They don't even have to care for us very much to know that when somebody comes in and says that we were being obstructionist to legalization, they know that's bullshit.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
They had some success people down in Ohio for some reason, but maybe because it was kind of new then, people didn't know how to handle these attacks. They weren't as established. I don't know what the deal is, but they were successful in hurting people in Ohio, unfortunately. But they've only had these little feeble attempts up here. Even when they've tried to lay it on, it just hasn't worked out for them. In fact, I believe it's more backfire than anything else.
Well, the character of the people that you're trying to go after is important too, because if you're going after people who are prone to being emotional, who are only partway committed to activism, and who could just say, "Screw it, I'm done with this. This is way too much drama for me." When you go after those people, maybe you make them pop. But when you go after people like you and I, who are in this, in it to win it, in it long term, and who are not going to be discouraged by some negativity. That's just stupid.
No question about it.
Yep.
No question about it.
Well, but that brings up another important point too, in that activism involves a number of different people representing different viewpoints. Not everybody's going to agree. It's not necessarily the fact that you and I don't agree. It's the way you present to me the fact that you don't agree with what I'm saying. That has a lot to do with whether or not I give a shit about your complaint. So when people, instead of approaching somebody like a man, and if they take to Facebook sniping, Chad Morrow, then it's really just not manly. It's not appropriate. You can't try and drag other people down just because of your own misery.
I would agree with that, but these are kind of a couple different things here. And I'm not trying to defend Chad, but somebody who's kind of been through the ringer, who's been persecuted, who's had several paramilitary raids on their homes and business, and about ready to go to jail for sure after spending all your money trying to fight against it. I mean, he's in a little bit of a fucked up situation, and if he's not emotionally handling that perfectly, I'll give him a little bit of room. Not that it's okay to misbehave or to act out or to cause problems. That's definitely not okay. But
never okay to misbehave.
People, so much more fucking wicked. Their motivation and their situation is different than that, and they're just purely just piece of shit assholes. And I'll submit, one of their characters tried to threaten a little bit by saying that when the time comes, they've got all this financial backing and they'll be able to be even more disruptive or something like that. And in reality is, anybody actually puts any money up behind these guys or purposefully wants to be in business with them, they are a useless piece of shit idiot. And people with a lot of money who are careful about where it goes and methodically built up their empire to get started with, the kind of people who can pay to play in this emerging industry, particularly down in Ohio where it's a lot more restrictive, are not the kind of people that assess this kind of a situation and find it to be a reasonable use of their funds. So this idea that it's just ridiculous.
The social media attacks are not normally funded by typical corporate entities, but it is a sabotage method that's used by individual activists at the direction of those corporate entities. So yeah.
Yeah, and you have to decide, how effective is this going to be? What kind of return on this am I going to get? Am I just going to hurt these guys I don't like? Or is this somehow going to advantage me? And I will submit they're incapable of hurting us. And no matter what happens to us via social media, it's not going to help or hurt anybody else in business.
No, and I can appreciate where maybe there was a need to silence strong voices during the language negotiation process we talked about earlier, when people were speaking out about the need to have, exoneration included along in the language too, and how many plants were appropriate and all those things. During that time, maybe it was, necessary to try and silence our voices, but they continued well after the language was already fixed. It didn't make any sense.
Well, these people weren't that strategic either. There was one scenario in which one of them came into our campaign offices and had a meeting and suggested something that was literally damaging and stupid. I should say not only stupid, but potentially very damaging. And when it was summarily refuted to utilize this exceptionally, ridiculously stupid idea, the attacks quickly ensued. So that was just purely retaliatory because somebody didn't get their way. That's the kind of level of shit that we're dealing with in some cases with these people. So there is no rhyme. There
is no rhyme or reason, Jamie. And I can recall another incident where they attacked a prominent member of MI Legalized in a way that was horribly inappropriate. And phone calls were made, and within, half an hour or so, the attack mod was taken down? Is that about right?
Somebody who purportedly didn't even know who these people are. We heard in reports subsequently that they did know each other, but that's beside the point. But yes, even though somehow this person did not know who these other people are, what they're doing, that stuff got taken care of really quick with a phone call. So there's obviously connectivity there. Some people believe it's part of this political process to to have these obstructionists and irritants out there trying to do something, whatever their purpose is. It's, it's part of what they believe is necessary to be successful. And these same people did at one time offer, like, specifically these sabotage kind of services.
Yep.
So,
hey, Jamie, I hate to say it, but it's about 5 minutes till. I think we got to wrap up the show, right, Derek?
Yes, sir. Well, it's not time to wrap up the show quite yet. It is time for you guys to, just retake the floor and kind of just.
Okay.
What's going on, Jamie? You got something? Are you trying to say something?
I want to here, man. We need some resolution. You don't just like in the middle of a sentence.
Well, fuck yeah, you
Anyways,
do.
I forgot what I was saying now, but from now on, understand that people need resolution, especially people like.
But your sentence is going like a lawyer. So.
All right. Well, anyway, these assholes are not effective here, and fuck them. And if you were in business with them, you're a fucking asshole too.
That was clear. Hey, man.
And,
that's a.
If it hasn't been said yet today, we need Dana Nessel to be our next Attorney General. In order for her to be the next Attorney General, she has to be endorsed by the Democratic Party during the convention. In order to go there and endorse her during that convention, you have to join the Michigan Democratic Party. You can find them online. You can go to a Dana Nessel fundraiser, and you can sign up. If you do it right online, you have to make a little bit of a donation. You print out the sheet or get a printed sheet from a fundraiser. You send it in, and it's free that way. If you're a member of the party, you can show up there for Secretary of State or Attorney General and for some other positions. Endorsements are voted on at that convention. That's April 15th, and you have to be a registered member of the party 30 days before then. If Dana Nessel is our next Attorney General, the CRMLA that we've been talking about will get implemented as intended and properly without a bunch of extra obstructionist opinions, like as Judy has provided, and extra law enforcement as he has encouraged. Which comes along with it, forfeiture and jail time and big fines and all types of crap, loss of liberty and rights and money. Dana will not do that to us. And everybody who cares about this, no matter what party you come from now, it's time to band together, get her in there for this reason. And for the reason of returning the Attorney General's office to the people. Schuette has abused that position for nearly 8 years now. And the idea of him attaining a higher position to abuse is just unfathomable. So we have to vote against Bill Schuette, for medical marijuana, and for Dana Nessel in 2018. That's the home run.
Yep. Well, there you go, Jim. That was actually amazing. I'm glad you said it because I tried to get it out earlier, but that's the big thing. Got to get
Well, Rick was there. I'm probably stopping all sensible things from being discussed in lieu of whatever he just wanted to talk about.
You guys are so mean.
I am that way.
Well, normally we would shout out the next show that's coming on, but I'll tell you what, it's a damn ghost town in here. Nobody's here. It's just me and Chris. It's cold, and we're about to shut down the whole station ourselves.
Good show. Stick around and listen to Freedom Works if you can. They talk about a lot of political stuff. They take a certain bent.
Man,
we're learning.
I was just telling you they're not here.
Well, I'm just saying that in general, people should segue right into the Freedom Works show. When they are there, firing out their take on things. If they're not there now, then it's more difficult to listen to them.
Fuck it. We'll take over their show and talk about cannabis then, too.
They do want to do that, and we will arrange to stay one time and bring that discussion into their show. And I'm interested because, again, they all over the political spectrum, there's a place and time to support cannabis. And whatever their take is, we'll have that discussion. And, it'll be interesting. But if they're not there today, holidays wrapping up, whatever their situation is, wish them the best, and in the future we can have people listen to the show. We got to sign off now. I'm good with that. I hope everybody had a good show. Thank you for coming in, Derek. Thank you for calling in, Rick. And thank you for being there, Chris, again.
No problem.
Doing whatever you did this show. I didn't hear you at all. I'm sure you were
I wasn't
providing
really
some kind of help somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm sure of that.
You just didn't listen hard enough.
Well,
He was brilliant.
He was brilliant.
Okay.
But thank you guys. Yeah, I do appreciate it.
I'm sure of that. I didn't question whether or not he was, in fact.
Don't eat up our last 2 minutes explaining yourself. Rick, give him a sign-off.
Out. Later. Enjoy 2018, people.
Jazz Cabbage Cafe until next week, every Tuesday from 4 to 6 p.m.